Mr. Speaker, I rise to firstly commend the Minister for Finance. I must confess, when he started, I was a little nervous because he started slowly. But he quickly went into overdrive and delivered a splendid speech, Mr. Speaker. I want to congratulate your members of staff, the Financial Secretary, and this Labour Party administration for presenting yet again another very impactful budget. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to make some general comments relative to the budget and relative to some of the complaints, statements, and intervention made by members of the other side of the House. And then I'll give a brief overview of the Ministry of National Security and Legal Affairs. But, Mr. Speaker, permit me, before I proceed into the fundamentals of what I want to say this morning, to ask of you a simple question. And how many podia you have in this parliament? You have only one podium? All right, only one. The reason why I'm asking that question, Mr. Speaker, the national budget and the response that comes thereafter represent, in our political history and civilization, the two most important, among the two most important addresses, Mr. Speaker, to come from this chamber. And therefore, that is why a podium is provided, to provide the Minister for Finance the opportunity to present the budget to the public with utmost precision and deliberation. The same can be said for the leader of the opposition. Historically, I've been in the House for a very long time. We have always had a response from the other side. But you know the situation confronting the other side right now, Mr. Speaker. So the Prime Minister invoked the rules of the House and allowed the member for Marigot, who, based on some arrangement, should have been the leader of the opposition. That's the business, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, I was speaking on his behalf with the member of Parliament for the Salisbury constituency to render to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. But, Mr. Speaker, after all I was not in the island, but after I witnessed and listened to this public fiasco, Mr. Speaker, coming from a member from Marigot, Mr. Speaker, honorable member for Salisbury, hold your thing. Because Tiwe Boyo, Mete Pai, Mr. Speaker. Membet, Mempon, Mr. Speaker. So I'm saying.
Interpret, that's a lot.
Well, the same animal, same here, same first. What's that? Tiwe Boyo, Mete Pai. The same thing? The same thing? The same thing? That's it. We've always in Dominica. Mr. Speaker, I mean, there was an opportunity for the guy to have used prime time and sell himself and to provide an alternate to what was presented by the government of Dominica, which of course is in keeping with our fundamental democracy. And bearing in mind, Mr. Speaker, the national budget provides the roadmap that speaks to the programs for the economic and social development of the country and the public administration of the country, Mr. Speaker. A very serious matter. Now, Mr. Speaker, then what I took from his contribution is that he wants to kill the young men of Dominica. But figuratively, because he wants to make Dominica a hub for smoking tobacco. Maybe he's planting high leaf in the hills of it. I don't know. But, Mr. Speaker, it is very frightening. But, Mr. Speaker, going back to the budget presented by the Minister for Finance, again, Mr. Speaker, and the theme, Mr. Speaker, of this budget is very instructive. And it calls for the application of good judgment in the usage of the limited resources at the disposal of this government. He went on to say further, Mr. Speaker, that we must be mindful of the global circumstances impacting our front, impacting the world, small island states like Dominica. And as a consequence, Mr. Speaker, it is difficult for us to live in this current climate because of the realities of global change, of climate change, Mr. Speaker, and global wars. This is a serious budget. It's within that context, therefore. We're hoping to have a discussion and to have a response from the other side, Mr. Speaker. Now, what situation we have found ourselves in, Mr. Speaker, in 2024? That makes it so difficult for us to inflation, price inflation, Mr. Speaker, etc., etc. But, Mr. Speaker, what is more fascinating and refreshing about this budget, Mr. Speaker? Manifested in it is a human heart, Mr. Speaker. Notwithstanding our limited resources, this government, this Labour Party administration, does not want to hurt the people of Dominica. Does not want to make it more difficult for the people of Dominica. And as a consequence, Mr. Speaker, feels and cares for the people of Dominica. That is why, Mr. Speaker, we have no taxes on the backs of the people of this country, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding what we are going through, Mr. Speaker, despite of that, Mr. Speaker, despite of that, we are building a dynamic Dominica for the children, Mr. Speaker, in kindergarten school, Mr. Speaker. In the kindergarten school. And I can stay in this house, Mr. Speaker, because yesterday when I was coming in, we actually came in, there was a tropical wave. That's what I'm saying? And you know, when you bring shift to land, I say, one day, I pray. But Mr. Speaker, I'm saying that within the context, Mr. Speaker, to say to this honorable house, Mr. Speaker, but by the end of 2026, Mr. Speaker, direct flights will be coming from the major centers in the world, Mr. Speaker, straight to Dominica, from London, from Hong Kong, Mr. Speaker, from China, from New York, from Canada, from Tokyo, Mr. Speaker. That is what this budget is all about, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we are saying further, by 2025, the end of 2025, people like Mami and Vado and thousands of tourists coming into this country will be able to hop a cable car and go and witness, Mr. Speaker, for the first time of their lives, Mr. Speaker, the boiling lake, the cable car, Mr. Speaker. That is what this budget ought to be about, Mr. Speaker. That is what we're talking about. Despite the hard times, that's what we're doing. Building a dynamic Dominica for all to enjoy and thrive. That is what the Labour Party is all about, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have been talking a lot about our heavy reliance on generators. But I can say to this honorable house, Mr. Speaker, by December of 2026, Mr. Speaker, our heavy reliance on generators as a major source of our energy, 25, sorry, will be a part of our past history, Mr. Speaker. That is what we're all about, Mr. Speaker. Cheaper energy, giving us a competitive edge, Mr. Speaker, and to create an environment, Mr. Speaker, for energy-intensive companies to thrive, Mr. Speaker. That is what this budget ought to be about. Despite trying times, Mr. Speaker, we are building a dynamic Dominica for kindergarten children and all, Mr. Speaker. That is what it's all about. And Mr. Speaker, we are not stopping here. We're not stopping here. By 2026, Mr. Speaker, the people in the North, more specifically the people of Portsmouth, have been yearning for a marina, Mr. Speaker. And it is coming, Mr. Speaker, in the North. That is what this budget is all about, Mr. Speaker. Creating, igniting the North, igniting Portsmouth, Mr. Speaker, to create jobs and a buzz for the entire North, Mr. Speaker. That is what this budget is all about, in spite of the difficulties confronting this world, Mr. Speaker. Despite of that. That's what we're talking about. And all of the difficulties that we have, and as we actually apply our good judgment in using, Mr. Speaker, our limited resources, there are certain things because of the mantra of the Labour Party that we have to preserve. The elderly, the children, Mr. Speaker. And that is why we are preserving our social services, Mr. Speaker, and our people development, Mr. Speaker, in this budget, Mr. Speaker. That is what we are all about in the Dominica Labour Party, Mr. Speaker. And then they speak, as we say, the country broke. Nothing happened in this country, Mr. Speaker. But let me say something, Mr. Speaker. Despite of the circumstances confronting this world, this Labour Party administration will again raise the minimum wage for the ordinary folks of this country, Mr. Speaker, so that they can cope with the issue of price inflation. We realize and we appreciate as the Dominica Labour Party that the ordinary worker, the common man, The only commodity he can sell is his labor power. And in exchange for his labor power, Mr. Speaker, he has to be paid a wage. We are saying in the Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, that wage that is being paid to this ordinary man has to be able to enable him to survive and to feed his family, Mr. Speaker. That is what we're all about. And let us talk about the Labour Party having a good heart, Mr. Speaker. The Dominica Freedom Party spent 15 years in power. They adjusted the minimum wage in 1988, 99, once in 15 years. When the Workers' Party came into office, we have a minimum wage by categories, not a flat across the line. The minimum wage a couple dollars, $2, $3, the highest. $2. They never touch it. They never adjusted the minimum wage. It was under Roosevelt and his Labour Party administration in 2007, 2008 that we adjusted again the minimum wage. We just recently, again, I was the minister then. We just recently adjusted it, Mr. Speaker, and have categories and the minimum wage. Let us just speak about the minimum wage. It doesn't say that is what you have to pay the employee. It says that you cannot pay, it's a ceiling in which you cannot pay the employees below. You must pay. But any smart worker is not going to pay the exact minimum wage. But there are some people who will do it. That is why it's important to protect the workers. So we'll raise the thing, the various category, $7.25, $7.24 for security guards, $8 per an hour. We actually further defined the categories include bartenders, Mr. Speaker, and waiters, etc. And all these different categories and shop assistants. And we are saying in the Labour Party, we stand for the ordinary people. So we did that, and we shall be doing it again. You heard the Minister for Finance, Mr. Speaker, made a reference to the establishment of a board working in the private sector to look at all the variables and to come back with a recommendation. But we in the Labour Party, on behalf of the people of this country, the ordinary man who have made this country what it is today, we will raise the minimum wage for the people of this country again, Mr. Speaker. That's what we're saying. And that is what it ought to be about, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Senator Delbert Paris. Mr. Speaker. Smooth operator. Smooth operator. Mr. Speaker. Don't laugh. I'm from Mao. Mao, Newton, so it's trouble. You see, there's, Teddy Prendergrass. There's something about smooth operators. They come, they appear to be bright, speak, roll their eyes, smile, forehead shining, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, these are the folks you have to be very careful with. People who speak slow and smile. There's something, you know what I'm saying? So, Minister says something. Something weird. Something weird. So, Mr. Speaker, he created a bright guy, yeah, but he must stick to his lane. Understand? And he must not mistake drafting for drafting of letters, Mr. Speaker. Because he was the major drafter for the letter that went to the president that was told. Mr. Speaker, he painted a very gloomy picture about the finances of the state. And he said things are bad. The government can't pay debts. So many unpaid checks. But paradoxically, this got on the same Brooks government, Mr. Speaker, to establish or to create a special fund in the commercial banks so that truckers, private truckers, can get financing and buy new trucks. He's not aware of the debt portfolio of the private sector, of private truckers, whether they own the banks, etc. But a Brooks government, Mr. Speaker, should come and put money in the bank and to allow all and sundry to say, I want a loan, I want money to buy a truck. How is that making sense, Mr. Speaker? How is that making sense? It makes no sense, Mr. Speaker. Then, Mr. Speaker, what I would expect him to make reference to are the real indicators. To give us an appreciation as to what transpired then and what is happening now in terms of the size of the economy. Okay, and Mr. Speaker, the proxies that we use to measure, say, Mr. Speaker. Now, let us go back to 1999 when this party was in office. Like we talk about, there were more jobs before, more people were in Dominica before, etc. But what In this budget this year we are presenting, what is the recurrent expenditure that you're presenting? As opposed to 1999. In 1999, the recurrent expenditure was how much? $211 million. That is, now our recurrent expenditure is almost 4 times that then in 1999. What was the estimate for capital projects in 1999, Mr. Honorable Paris, smooth operator? What? $181 million, including the fake international airport. All right? Now it's almost $1 billion, Mr. Speaker. Almost 8 times more significant than that one transpired then, Mr. Speaker. But they're not talking about that. Smooth operators. You understand? Smooth operators. We have to listen to the small, we have to listen to them. And have to jam them back, Mr. Speaker. They're too smooth. They're too smooth. Then, Mr. Speaker, you said, Mr. Speaker, that people live in the country in growth. Mr. Speaker, when you're looking at statistics, and you're a social scientist, so, yeah, the pure science man, right? Natural science guy, sorry about that. But of course, you have some social science background. We look at trends. We look at trends over a period of time, isn't that so? Mr. Speaker, from 1995, the population rate, the birth rate has been going down from 1995. Because why, Mr. Speaker? Look at in this honorable house, the number of women sitting in government and in opposition, permanent secretaries, Mr. Speaker. Women are more independent. No longer this traditional view and precept of a woman belonging to the home as housemakers. This thing, we are departed from that. Women are equally competent as men to be managers and politicians, Mr. Speaker. So they make less babies. It's not big science to understand that. But what was the population, Mr. Speaker, in 1999? In 1999, the population of Dominica, the average population, or the end of the year population in 1999, was 71,143. 71,143. What it is now? The last estimate we did, using a particular methodology, Mr. Speaker, was in 2022, sorry. What was it? 71,845. So I don't understand, you understand? When they're talking about what they're talking about. Those are the facts, Mr. Speaker. And then, something very interesting. After Hurricane Maria, people who had left the country came back to the country after. They came back. At one stage, our average population was in the range of 73,000 people. But people came back to work after Hurricane David. And look at that. Now there's still less people working. Mr. Speaker, let me just make it fundamentally clear in this honorable house, Mr. Speaker. This is on the Labour Party. You have seen the most contributors, Mr. Speaker, to the Social Security Fund, Mr. Speaker, under the Labour Party administration, Mr. Speaker. And I can quote the figures, Mr. Speaker. I can quote the figures if you give me a chance to quote the figures, Mr. Speaker. I don't like to read, but I think this thing is so important, Mr. Speaker. You understand? Mr. Speaker, we had moved in 2018 and 2019 to 26,000 contributors, Mr. Speaker. People contributing to Social Security. Right. Because they have jobs. And because, let's put that into context, Mr. Speaker. The people who are paying to Social Security are those who want to pay. There may be a number of people working, self-employed, who are not reporting, Mr. Speaker. But we're saying we have been able to move that, Mr. Speaker, to the highest, and the economy was roaring after Hurricane Maria. Then came COVID. That created certain situations for us as a result of the consequence. People could not work, but to stay home. But look at that, Mr. Speaker. They are still compiling the statistics for 23-24. But where they are now? There are 2 large companies that have not presented the records. But so far, they have 25,062, which means we're going to surpass the 26,000 figure. That is what the Labour Party is doing on behalf of the people of Dominica. More people are working and contributing to Social Security, Mr. Speaker. So I'm not sure where they're getting the statistics from, Mr. Speaker. But I wanted to make those general comments there, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to speak briefly, and I don't want to be too long, on the Ministry of National Security and Legal Affairs. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to firstly take this opportunity to commend the Permanent Secretary, the various heads of the department, the cleaners, staff members, security guards at the various hurricane shelters, all who have been involved in making the ministries what it is today. We take our job very seriously. And that's why we have been engaging the public, Mr. Speaker, over the past year. And every Tuesday, since the second and last Tuesdays of every month, we have a program where we bring different heads of department, Mr. Speaker. But I want to start, Mr. Speaker, on the whole issue of criminal justice reform. And I want to just dissect it a bit, Mr. Speaker, and speak to the prison system a bit. Because we have to look at the structural issues, Mr. Speaker, within the various functionaries of the criminal justice system, Mr. Speaker. And what can we do, Mr. Speaker, to make our prison less congested? What can we do, Mr. Speaker, to make our young people less inclined to return to prison, Mr. Speaker? That is important. And then how do we to remove this kind of penal connotation from our prison system? And to have, that's what we have been looking at, having a commissioner of prison and correctional services, Mr. Speaker. So what we have been able to do, Mr. Speaker, as we speak, is to embark on some programs, vocational skills, especially for young people, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that when they leave the prison setting, they can go back into society and contribute towards mainstream society, Mr. Speaker, with a skill. So as we speak in, Mr. Speaker, we are partnering with, Mr. Speaker, with the youth division, and thank you very much, and where we are actually converting a building into a training center. At the same time, we have a construction module, and the work is being done by the prisoners, and they'll be certified as in the field of construction at the end. And we shall be doing, Mr. Speaker, a number of vocational undertakings at the training center to include sewing, tailoring, Mr. Speaker, woodcraft, leathercraft. That is what the Labour Party is all about, Mr. Speaker. That is what we're embarking on, Mr. Speaker. And we rehabilitate. So you want to rehabilitate instead of incarcerate, Mr. Speaker. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, I've been hearing them talking about people in the jail, etc. We have only one juvenile young person at the prisons for a very serious offense, Mr. Speaker. And we're hoping that, because up to last month we had no young person, Mr. Speaker, in the prisons. The population of the prison stands at 260, Mr. Speaker, with 2 females. So the question I'm asking myself, why are men more inclined to commit crimes? The population of 260 inmates, you have only 2 females. Mr. Speaker, and then I'm saying that, I'm giving that number, Mr. Speaker, for the purpose of trying to make a comparison, because people say about everybody in jail. But in 2003 and 2007, I was a minister, the population was about 350. So our intention on, because of COVID, Mr. Speaker, we have a number of people on remand. So we're trying to deal with that matter. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, we have to address the efficiency or lack thereof within the court system. And I want to say further that the court is the ultimate arbiter of matters before the court. Not the Prime Minister, not the Minister, not the Attorney General. You know what I'm saying? Our role, my role as the Minister, from a policy standpoint, is to make the environment more conducive for the operation of the court, Mr. Speaker. Ensure that you have enough staff, and I want to in terms of the magistrate court, Mr. Speaker, we have to ensure we create an environment where people feel motivated to work. So we have just recently seen the appointment of 8 staff members within the magistrate court, Mr. Speaker. That's the first time I've had 8 people appointed within the magistrate court, Mr. Speaker. Ordinary staff members, that's important, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we are going to continue to look at the prison system. We are now working on the remand section. We're now installing the gate to have a specific cell to have the people who are on remand, who have not been actually sentenced, Mr. Speaker, so that they can be housed, Mr. Speaker, in a setting where they have the washroom. They have a washroom facility. That is what we're about, Mr. Speaker. Even if you're in prison, you have to have certain basic rights, Mr. Speaker. So these are the things that we're doing. Now, Mr. Speaker, why can't the prison feed itself? We have this remarkable labor force. So right now we're embarking, Mr. Speaker, on the establishment of a farm. As we speak, there's planting, dashing, bananas, etc. Just name it, Mr. Speaker. And we're now working in the Ministry of Agriculture. Thank you very much, sir, to get a couple of greenhouses, Mr. Speaker, to have our vegetables and to produce our eggs, Mr. Speaker. That is what, and to give to the infirmary, give to the hospital. That is what we're all about, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just want to go back to the magistrate court. We have actually, Mr. Speaker, appointed an additional magistrate. We are looking for additional magistrate. We are to look at the structures within the system to make the court more efficient. We are just getting through the actual job description for a registrar for the magistrate court or a case manager for the magistrate court to ensure that the magistrates themselves portfolio can be properly managed and the people of Dominica can get his money worth, Mr. Speaker. That is what we're all about, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, creating an environment for the witnesses, Mr. Speaker. We just spent over $150,000 at the magistrate court to build a proper waiting area for witnesses. When it passes, you can see it, we put in washrooms, etc. We just painted the building, and we have 6 court spaces, Mr. Speaker. And we're going to formalize in due time a family court, Mr. Speaker, with all the supporting human resource component that we need. That is what this budget is all about, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, $60 million plus was made under the current expenditure for the Ministry of National Security and Legal Affairs. And in that, Mr. Speaker, over $1 million going to be spent to train 60 additional police constables, recruits. It's important to have the numbers, Mr. Speaker, and training should start in the next 2 months, Mr. Speaker. We have established within the police force a specific unit under the umbrella of the Criminal Investigation Department for the investigation of domestic violence, Mr. Speaker. I call on the public to report all such matters to the police, and I call on the police to respond to those matters quickly and with a sense of professionalism, Mr. Speaker. That is what we're all about, Mr. Speaker. We came to Parliament and passed a series of family bills, domestic violence, right? The status of rights of a child, setting aside this antiquated, Mr. Speaker, definition of a child, bastard, out of wedlock. We have done away with that, Mr. Speaker. All every child is a child, so every child, Mr. Speaker, has equal right, whether you're born within, sadly, whether you're born within marriage or out of marriage, every child is a child. Labour Party has a heart. It's about people, Mr. Speaker. All these things that we have done. Now, going back to Mr. Paris, Delbert Paris, smooth operator. Honorable.
Honorable.
Yeah, the drafter. Yeah, Mr. Speaker. He made reference to marijuana. But the guy who hates smoke, the guy doesn't like it. Delbert doesn't smoke anything. He spoke about marijuana. Mr. Speaker, well, I don't know. I don't know what he smoked, but he doesn't smoke marijuana for sure, from my investigation. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, this Labour Party administration came to Parliament, Mr. Speaker. You were part of the process, led by yours truly, Mr. Speaker, to decriminalize the possession of a certain quantum of marijuana, which means the police cannot charge anyone if that person were to be found with an ounce of marijuana or less. What that means, also, that anybody who was charged in the past, that cannot be in the record to be used against them for a job or to apply for a visa. Do you understand, Mr. Smooth Operator, Mr. Delbert, Honorable? So there is a question about you have scores of people in jail for possession of marijuana. You have to make a distinction between possession of marijuana with intent to supply and simple possession. And let me say to you again, Mr. Delbert, Honorable, there is no one at the state prison for simple possession. For a matter of fact, the police cannot charge anyone for simple possession of marijuana in less than an ounce of marijuana or 1 ounce. Write it down. You like to write, Mr. Speaker. Now, we came in this budget, Mr. Speaker, and we spoke about, Mr. Speaker, the medical use of marijuana and looking to set up a whole industry. What we have done as a responsible government, Mr. Speaker, is to have an incremental approach. Then we did it with a number of young men who have been criminalized and marginalized as a consequence. We ensure that, of course, we decriminalize a certain quantum of marijuana. Now, we're talking about marijuana for medical use. What we did, with the aid of the Canadian, there was a ministerial committee put in place, chaired by yours truly, along with a technical committee chaired by the Attorney General, to look at all the framework, because there are some countries in the world, marijuana still remains illegal. We have treaties with these countries. So you have to be mindful of those impediments, so to speak. in developing the sector. What we did, Mr. Speaker. Then we are not ready. As we speak, we have actually retained the services of a renowned legal drafter, Mr. Anthony Laron, who is currently looking at the legislation to give effect to medical marijuana. That's what we're doing, Mr. Speaker. But to create the impression that it's going to be a situation whereby all men can buy marijuana and go to the market to sell like watercress, Mr. Speaker, and cabbage, Mr. Speaker. Listen to him. You see, it's nonsensical. Because what the industry has to be regulated. And you have to issue licenses for the certified producer. So, you look at me when I closely, you have plans. So then you can apply. Apply when the situation arises to go into medicinal marijuana. No interest in you. So you're smiling because you like money. We Elijah. Yeah. Elijah. Yeah. And that is what we're doing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, companies. I want to take this opportunity to really commend the registered companies. I mean, the passion, she takes in the job. And, it's remarkable. For matter of fact, all the heads of the department. And then I want to also say to the public that companies plays a very important role in ensuring that we are compliant. And so far as money laundering is concerned, and to ensure that we stay out from the blacklist. And she has been doing it along with her staff. I want to take this opportunity to commend her staff. And then everything can be done online. This ministry, Mr. Speaker, is one of the most proactive ministries in ensuring that you can go online and do any business with us, the government. You know what I'm talking about? And then, Mr. Speaker, what we have seen because of the increased efficiency on the part is that for this last financial year, 23-24, Mr. Speaker, $1,470,000 was raised. All right, that's an increase of $96,000. So the notion that companies are simply there, companies are also raising revenue, ensuring that we remain compliant. And I want to just call on a number of people who have been randomly going around and just meet Mr. Grant and say, I want to form a non-profit. Come as a director. All right? Wash your foot and come. And then they go and they start the process of raising funds, even before applying through the lawyer, declaring the directors, and to get a license issued by the minister, which is illegal. And I'm saying further that non-profit organization has to be compliant insofar as the law is concerned. Because you're answerable under the Proceeds of Crime Act. We place an obligation on every non-profit organization to keep proper records, to keep their books intact. Because the minister, by law, can ask for an audit at any time. The Financial Services Unit, the FIU, can come randomly by law and inspect your books, Mr. Speaker. And then to say further, it's important for all companies and non-profit to have directors meeting. So not only the wash your foot and come, somebody met me and have directors overseas, then I come Dominica, I just meet that fellow there. Ed was very remarkable in his presentation, Mr. Speaker. And said, Ed I want to form a small non-profit. I want you to be a director and just send to the minister. It doesn't go that way. It doesn't work that way. And then we have to ensure that we do not expose the country to risk for us to be blacklisted again. So the ministry, companies, have that obligation, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that there is proper due diligence done on every applicant. You have to ensure that every director is properly investigated, Mr. Speaker, because some of them come in malintent, Mr. Speaker, and to front the money, etc., and to do other stuff, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, fire and ambulance services, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for year ending, the fire department responded to 10,192 calls. Okay? 9,757 were ambulance responses, Mr. Speaker. Others were accidents. And I want to call on, Mr. Speaker, the bike riders And those who like to ride at the back with short pants and slippers on the foot, etc. Pum pum short sometimes. Mr. Speaker. That there's a public health implication. When you have a number of people not protecting themselves, not wearing protective gear, getting involved in an accident, is a cost to the government. When you go to the hospital. So, Mr. Speaker, what we're doing now? One might say, why the police are not enforcing the law? Mr. Speaker, Chapter 4650, that is the traffic ordinance, namely Section 7801, 78.1 of that same ordinance, Mr. Speaker, it says that every rider should be equipped with a headgear. So there has been a technicality because headgear is not defined. Because man can just take a mush with his head and say that I have a headgear, I can put a cap. So some of us, like the member for Roseau Central, we have nice fancy cap, you understand? Right? Can put a cap, you understand? On her free wheel, how you call them again? The ATV. That free body will go on there, and I call them. Okay? With no headgear. You have to set the example. That is prohibited, Mr. Speaker. Understand? So, Mr. Speaker, I'll be looking closely for the breakfast fare to all the riders, especially my colleagues who ride without hat. Yes, and tell them, be careful with that. Set the example. So, as we speak, the specialist that we have, the draft person, is making sure that he does the drafting for the proper regulation to be issued and to criminalize the non-wearing of proper headgear, proper protective gear. Start chairs to your hand. There's a member of cabinet of mine, a friend of mine before, but he's on free shape still. He had no glove, Mr. Speaker. So we have to ensure that doesn't happen again, Mr. Speaker. So that's a very serious matter, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was making reference a while ago about the magistrate court. And the magistrate court in last financial year actually saw a 32% increase in revenue collection.
22 more minutes.
How much?
22.
22?
Yeah.
That's cool, man. That's cool. I see the financial secretary making notes. But the magistrate court was able to actually see an increase of 42% in the revenue. So we have seen revenue increases in companies and also the magistrate court, Mr. Speaker. And that is the way we want to go to ensure that monies are collected on behalf of the state. Mr. Speaker, and that's why, Mr. Speaker, I'm listening to the Minister of Finance, and when he made reference to the number of people owing the state, Mr. Speaker, one of the areas that we have to look at, we have to look at is the issue of people who are not compliant in terms of paying the driver's licenses, Mr. Speaker, and the vehicle licensing. So we're going to ensure that we're more aggressive in ensuring that, because when you drive on the road with an unlicensed vehicle, an uninsured vehicle, you're posing a risk not only to yourself, but to others, Mr. Speaker. And it's absolutely important for you to be responsible as a responsible citizen and to pay your driver's license and to pay your vehicle license and to pay your insurances, Mr. Speaker. So that's something that the police, Mr. Speaker, because the chief of police is the commissioner of traffic, has to be more proactive, and they're giving the commitment that they're going to step up. But you know, people have tricks. Now, people like to call the minister, message the minister, why the police stopping the vehicles 8 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But at the time, all they're trying to come in and escape. So at the time, the police can block all you. So there has to be some element of inconvenience. But to prevent that, Mr. Speaker, we have to ensure as a government that we make the services more available to our various communities. So what we will be doing, we have started the process, the ministry has started the process, we're working in concert with Inland Revenue. I have identified the spot in Portsmouth, Mr. Speaker, that people can apply and receive the driver's license in Portsmouth. They can apply for and receive the driver's licenses in Marigot, Mr. Speaker. And I believe if we were to do that, people will be more inclined, upon collection of the licenses, to pay the driver's licenses, Mr. Speaker. That is what we will be doing, Mr. Speaker, in the next couple of months. And that's what the Labour Party is all about, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, FIU. Mr. Speaker, the FIU of Dominica is by far the best in the region. I can say that. With no hesitation, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, over the years, we have seen a number of cases insofar as money laundering is concerned, Mr. Speaker. Last year, for this, the FIU actually was able to forfeit $954,000, Mr. Speaker, which of course can be used, was used, Mr. Speaker, in our effort, Mr. Speaker, to strengthen our structure within the police force and the entire law enforcement apparatus, Mr. Speaker, inclusive of the customs. Because we must never forget the customs. The customs has been very much involved with the police, Mr. Speaker, the FIU, to ensure that monies are confiscated. Before confiscated, Mr. Speaker, seized, and before forfeited, sorry, seized, and of course the matter can be actually litigated before the court, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Attorney General Office, Mr. Speaker, have a number of talented young Dominicans, Mr. Speaker, very bright people who are underpaid, I will say that. And then we will continue as the government to ensure that professional, as we did for the nurses. And I want to commend the government, the Prime Minister for that, Mr. Speaker. I heard somebody speaking and they make a reference to nurses going away. But notwithstanding the difficult times in this country, Mr. Speaker, we have seen a further upgrade of various positions, Mr. Speaker, within the nursing fraternity, Mr. Speaker. We are now a chief nursing officer, director of nursing services, Mr. Speaker. No more assistant nurse or, the various levels. No feeling like what sister. Can you imagine Vincent Ness is a nurse and you call him what sister? That's what I'm saying? So I'm saying, I said, what sister, no, what sister? That's right. What sister? No. So now we make it, gender-free. You understand what kind of definition, Mr. Gender-neutral, sorry. Gender-neutral kind of definition. All these things that we're doing, Mr. Speaker, in hard time. So the nurses' salaries have gone up again. And I want to commend the government for that. Commend the Prime Minister, commend the Minister of Finance, Mr. Speaker. Because my first sister was a nurse. I know it's a very difficult undertaking. I own a uniform for her. It's a very difficult undertaking, Mr. Speaker. To work, and what else we have to do is to ensure when they end work at night, we provide transportation for them to go to the homes. So that is what we are about, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to make something very clear. There are a lot of bad boys around. And they believe to settle a difference, they have to use a gun. And Mr. Speaker, what we see with cocaine, and there's a nexus between hard illegal drugs, cocaine, and illegal firearms, Mr. Speaker. You know what I'm saying? And Mr. Speaker, one in a small island state like Dominica, within 1 month, a street value of $67 million of cocaine, seized by the police. That is reason for concern. Mr. Speaker, my entire life, I've been to stand for the rule of law. I will stand for the rule of law in government and outside government, Mr. Speaker. We have to put the brakes on those fellows, Mr. Speaker. The guys who are using our young men as mules, Mr. Speaker, have to be dealt with and confronted frontally, Mr. Speaker, to the street. But the thing is that, what we have to put into context, Mr. Speaker, some of the cocaine were found on the ground, buried, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, they come by sea. It's a transshipment point. But we have to understand that because of our small population size, this spillover effect can corrupt and turn our young men into addicts also. Because they're using that money to corrupt our young guys and to corrupt other people. And we have to put an end to that. And I want to commend the police commissioner, commend the guys in drug squad, commend the guy in the task force, commend all the police officers who have been involved in a very dangerous job to rid in the street of that quantity of cocaine, Mr. Speaker. That is Dominican to the bone, Mr. Speaker. And thank you very much to our police officers. I will continue to give support to the police in that regard. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, the back door, we're going to shut the back door. It is time to close the back door, Mr. Speaker. I'm not going to say what we've been doing, Mr. Speaker, but we are again further going to enhance our capabilities to properly, Mr. Speaker, survey, have surveillance, north, south, and to actually make sure that we have proper intelligence to further actually confront all those who are involved in that dangerous trade, Mr. Speaker. Cocaine, illegal firearms, Mr. Speaker. Can you imagine, Mr. Speaker, from 2000 to now, 2020 to now, Mr. Speaker, the police recovered 192 illegal firearms. That is what they have recovered. And of course, arrested and charged 150. As I said, let me reiterate, the court is the final arbiter, Mr. Speaker, of matters brought before it. But we had a gun amnesty program where you could have brought in your illegal firearm without fear of being prosecuted. You chose to keep a firearm. Anybody who has an illegal firearm intends to use it. Do you get my point I'm saying? And it means, therefore, the court has to take a more serious view of people who come before the court, especially people with prohibited firearms. When a man shoots somebody, execution style, Mr. Speaker, we have enacted a bail act that says and sets out the condition under which bail should not be granted and catalogs the various crimes, murder, kidnapping, certain illegal firearms. And if you have flight risk, etc., bail should not be considered. But never in the past, when somebody committed a brutal murder, that bail was even considered at the court. And Mr. Speaker, it is time, Mr. Speaker. I do not believe in taking human life. I do not give life. But I also believe in the philosophy of law. That when you have deliberately, calculated to take somebody else's life, you have, by so doing, forfeited your own life, your own right to live, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, once you have been afforded due process and found guilty by the court, Mr. Speaker, I see nothing wrong in applying for the death penalty for people who kill people, execution style, Mr. Speaker. We have to make an example of these people. Somebody in a hospital bed, you go to the hospital and you shoot that man while you're on the drips, Mr. Speaker. You are found guilty, or you're taken before the court, you have been granted bail, and you only blame Scarrett and Mr. Blackmoore for that. We came to Parliament and passed the Bail Act, Mr. Speaker. And those are the issues, Mr. Speaker. Those are the issues, Mr. Speaker, that we have to confront as a community and as a society. We have to deal with these things frontally. The court has a responsibility to the broader society, Mr. Speaker. It cannot operate within a vacuum, or it cannot be an authority of its own, Mr. Speaker. I have to say that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the registry staff worked hard during COVID and before Hurricane Maria. And I want to commend the staff also for the hard work. Mr. Speaker, you can get your vital life certificates within hours. You can apply, and once everything is in place, you can go to the registry and get a birth certificate within 5 minutes. Isn't that moving forward, Mr. Speaker? You can go online, Mr. Speaker, and pay for your services relative to the services, Mr. Speaker, issued by the registry, Mr. Speaker. The same thing for the court, Mr. Speaker, the courts. After talking about transforming the court, nobody is talking about, Mr. Speaker, that you can go using the e-portal at the High Court, the Supreme Court, sorry. And also we have introduced the e-portal at the magistrate court level, which means you can file online, Mr. Speaker. That is what we're doing within the Labour Party government, Mr. Speaker. Bringing services to the doorstep, the homes of everybody, Mr. Speaker. So it's for us, Mr. Speaker, as a country to play our part. The government can only do so much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, while we're talking about the court, Mr. Speaker, we now have a magistrate station in Portsmouth. You know, there was a hoopla before. And from one report, Mr. Speaker, he's doing a great job. And his government will continue to address all these issues. We are now building a new magistrate court in Granby. We are building a new fire station in Granby, Mr. Speaker. All these things are doing. We have $4 million set aside in the estimates to continue some of the projects that we have begun, Mr. Speaker, including the secondary fence at the prisons, which is almost complete, Mr. Speaker. So all those things that we're doing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I end, I must talk about the legal aid. Because when you talk about reform in the justice system, we have to talk about access, having access to the court, having access to an attorney. And the number of people, Mr. Speaker, who have been charged who go into a situation, there are some women living with some men who are abusive, and they want to get a divorce. They don't have the money. Some of them are still dependent on the husband. And it can be a woman too. But we all know that, and people get vexed when I say that, but we all know that in most cases, 99% of the cases, the abused party is always a woman. Let us not fool ourselves, Mr. Speaker. So the legal aid have been doing a fantastic job so far. And I want to commend the director and the staff. And then for this year on which I'm reporting, they were able to assist people who were seeking divorces. Not a nice thing to do. We encourage the family, Mr. Speaker. That's 33 divorce cases were done by the legal aid. They were telling people who were charged for serious matters without a right to an attorney, without an attorney. Legal aid provided that right to that. There are some people who are seeking protection orders from the court. Legal aid was able to assist 20 people in that regard, Mr. Speaker. So we are having a situation looking at the criminal justice system from a holistic standpoint. Not only having more magistrates and more judges, but to ensure we look at the structures within the system and to ensure that even the common man, not having a lawyer, can be afforded one at the cost of the state. And I want to say to you, Mr. Speaker, among the OECS catchment, Dominica is among one of the only countries with such a service, Mr. Speaker. But they don't talk about that because they have this kind of one-dimensional view as to how the criminal justice system should work, Mr. Speaker. All these things we have been able to do, Mr. Speaker, in the ministry. We, ODM, and the Met Services, Mr. Speaker. The Met Services under Mr. Itoma James, very impressive young man and his staff, Mr. Speaker. We now have a situation where we have trained forecasters. We have departed from the past, Mr. Speaker, used to be the minister before, where we have to rely on foreign interests to issue warnings, watches. We now have the competence to do that. That is development, Mr. Speaker, because we have within GMIT the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, as well as the human resource component. We are looking at, Mr. Speaker, of improving the human resource component. We're working with the establishment department to have additional staffing at the ODM, at the Met Office, Mr. Speaker. The same for ODM, which I shall speak to in a while, Mr. Speaker. And to say, Mr. Speaker, look at what we have done. We have a number of water gauges, Mr. Speaker, on the various elevations to monitor our water levels, Mr. Speaker, and to instantaneously send information to the technical people within the Met Office. We're going to advise the policymakers. That is what we have been able to do, Mr. Speaker. All that we have been able to do within the Met Services. And we shall engage, Mr. Speaker, going forward, continue to have this public community outreach program to engage the people on the work that the ODM and Met Office is doing. Mr. Speaker, I want to speak about the ODM and from a whole standpoint of the need for decentralization. So, Mr. Speaker, we have been able to do the hurricane shelters, etc. But the nerve of the operation of the ODM has to also be decentralized. So going forward, Mr. Speaker, we need to have something similar that obtains in GMIT right now in the north, maybe preferably Portsmouth. So we can actually decentralize, the whole approach of disaster management in this country. But one of the important things that I want to make reference to, because in the past I've spoken about the number of people you have trained in radios, etc., for a greater degree of redundancy. We have, Mr. Speaker, installed repeaters throughout the country, because when a hurricane strikes, the traditional communication system goes off. We have trained over 144 people in the various communities as to how to operate telecommunication sets, Mr. Speaker. That is tremendous, Mr. Speaker. We have 66 satellite phones, Mr. Speaker, in our possession to be deployed to the first responders, the nurses, doesn't name it. We are doing this thing, Mr. Speaker. And for the first time, we are able, on our phones, in our offices, we can monitor the level of the boiling lake, Mr. Speaker, because we have cameras installed there. This government is a serious government, Mr. Speaker. This is a serious government, Mr. Speaker. And as we speak about ODM, we're in hurricane season. I call on the public, because we have been going out to the schools to ensure that disaster mitigation, disaster management is a lifestyle matter. It has to be part of the national psyche. It has to be part of our school programs, Mr. Speaker. So we're working with the schools, we're working with the communities, Mr. Speaker. But I want to talk about the issue of mitigation that we're missing, Mr. Speaker. And I'm saying that, Mr. Speaker, this thing came to my mind when we had the isolated matter as a consequence of burial, when we had elevated seas Never an issue of Dominica, some of us were not born yet. The only time I saw Wales highlight was Hurricane David. I don't think of my colleague Mr. Vince, he was very, very young at the time. Huh? And Mr. Speaker, so the roads we are building in the East Coast, Mr. Speaker, and for the Christmas, the people in Castle Bruce and the other areas, including the Carnaval people, will be able to drive on brand new roads, properly secured, Mr. Speaker. So when it rains, Mr. Speaker, we have storm drains, box culverts, Mr. Speaker, widest carriageway, Mr. Speaker. That we're talking about mitigation at the core, Mr. Speaker. Building a country of resilience, Mr. Speaker, consistent with what the Prime Minister said, making Dominica the first climate resilient country of the world, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, when I think about the impact of the sea, I think about my good friend from Mrs. Pemberton. I can make a mistake because she's married to somebody from where? My whole constituency, yes, sir. I can't make a mistake. And Mr. Speaker, I can recall, look, I see the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Public Works. He was a senior engineer at the time. When we built the seawall in Point Michel, $24 million, Mr. Speaker. People used to fall down, Mr. Speaker, in the sea before. People died on the Point Michel Road, Mr. Speaker. And were it not for the sea defense wall, Mr. Speaker, in Point Michel, the seas from Berry would have destroyed the community of Point Michel, Mr. Speaker. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about mitigation, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, the same can be said for Soufriere. It is your government who spent $27 million to build that wall in Soufriere, mitigation to the core. And were it not for that wall, the roads in Soufriere and homes in Soufriere would have been gone, Mr. Speaker. That is what we're talking about, planning and proper governance, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I wind up, Mr. Speaker, 3 of us were there in 2000. The Prime Minister is not there. Honorable Henderson was the one who caused me, ultimately, to come on board. I saw this young, when I was working, I just came to make duties at the CID office, with a television there, and I saw this young, eloquent guy talking about I'm back in sensitive to one for sensitive constituency. You understand? It's like a grandpa. You understand? You understand? And before that, the Prime Minister who taught together at the college, gave me a letter, so we had to come on board. But Mr. Speaker, I want to conclude by saying that. Because I've been hearing people say that the Roosevelt Security Prime Minister and the Labour Party have departed from the dream of the late Roosevelt Douglas. And it's a mile of very much it caused me to get involved in politics and Spencer. But when he came into office, and before that, when he campaigned on the promise of what they call it, a new renaissance, building a new renaissance. And it was dwell in my mind at the time what he meant by that. Because within my psyche, when I hear about the word renaissance, it comes about to revive. Look at medical doctrine. The next one, revive. You only revive something that's dead. For a man to say, Mr. Speaker, I want to revive you, it means that how you can be sitting and managing your house and I have to revive you now? You're not dead, you're well, it's not so. So, he needed to revive the economy. And he spoke about things like the international airport. He spoke about housing for the poor. You can that? He spoke about health care for the poor. He spoke about education for the poor, Mr. Speaker. But what? May his soul rest in peace, he passed on. But what was preventing that renaissance from happening? Because we were embarking on the same status quo approach. And we expected different results, Mr. Speaker. So you needed someone to come in. You know when you're shaking a mango tree? And ripe, aborté, everything falling down, matute, falling down. You know what I'm saying? Matute. What I'm not matute, matute means matured. So you shake it through everything falling down. You needed somebody to come and shake the status quo. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, we are able to do what we're doing now, Mr. Speaker. Because then came the Prime Minister and challenged the status quo, took the risk, Mr. Speaker. And as a result, Mr. Speaker, we're getting the airport. As a result, Mr. Speaker, we're getting the cable car. As a result, Mr. Speaker, we're getting the marina. As a result, Mr. Speaker, we'll get the cruise village. As a result, Mr. Speaker, as a result, we'll get, Mr. Speaker, a new port, cargo port, Mr. Speaker. As a result, Mr. Speaker, we are training thousands of young people, children in medicine, in engineering, various contemporary disciplines, Mr. Speaker. That is what we're doing right now. As a result, Mr. Speaker, we are building hurricane-proof homes for thousands of people around the country. That is the renaissance that Mr. Douglas was talking about, Mr. Speaker.
1 minute.
Yeah, talking about, Mr. Speaker, that we were not able to achieve because we did not have the leadership to make the decision, to take the risk, Mr. Speaker. And all the things we are doing, most of what we're doing, are coming from our own financial circumstance. The airport, CBI, and just name it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I support this budget, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to again commend the Minister for Finance. I'm going to commend the Financial Secretary and the staff, Mr. Speaker. And all the permanent secretaries, Mr. Speaker. But most importantly, let me again express my gratitude to the permanent secretary within the Ministry of National Security and Legal Affairs, the various heads of department, staff members, messengers, security guards, cleaners, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for your support, and thank you for serving Dominica, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.